Hi everyone, my name is Jenna Wispiansky and I'm currently a junior studying history and education with a minor in social studies at Bridgewater State University. For the past semester, I've been doing a literature review on the topic of how high school history textbooks, particularly U.S. history textbooks, represent minorities, most importantly African Americans, and how these representations could be slightly false or create false assumptions on that group of people. So why am I studying this topic? I feel that it's extremely important for teachers to understand that history textbooks only scratch the surface of history. Relying on a textbook can lead to a lack of a well-rounded education on the subject, and learning about the history of race often takes place for the first time for students in classrooms, and adolescents' views on these subjects are often formed, and their opinions on these subjects are formed when they're taught in those classrooms. A lot on the teachers for them to be sure that they teach this subject correctly, incorporating multiple perspectives. It's important to read beyond the textbook, and it's especially important to use primary sources and create a safe, open space for students to ask questions, as race is often a tricky subject for certain students to speak about, especially for the first time. So one of the key articles that I read was written by LaGarrett J. King, Christopher Davis, and Anthony L. Brown, titled African American History, Race and Textbooks, an Examination of the Works of Harold O. Rugg and Carter G. Woodson. These authors essentially did a comparative analysis of two history textbooks. One was written by a white author, Harold O. Rugg, and the other was written by an African American author, Carter G. Woodson. So essentially, they analyzed these two texts specifically on when they discussed race and analyzed the patterns that they found. So for Harold O. Rugg, the white author, they found that he spoke little on any accomplishments of African Americans, spoke about them typically as victims, and he portrayed the continent of Africa in terms of a place of imperialization for Europeans and Americans, and he even, in one section, slyly defended the actions of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's important to note, however, that this textbook was written in the 1930s, and so was Woodson's, but that in no way defends anything that is being said. Additionally, Carter G. Woodson's portrayal of African Americans is quite the opposite, and arguably it's more justified. Woodson portrayed African Americans in terms of their achievements rather than their historical roles as victims. So basically, Woodson didn't portray African Americans as victims, but he also didn't portray them as superior to other ethnicities. So essentially, he's writing them as equal, which is not very common in textbooks. He also highlighted the important role that African Americans played in America's history, and in one part of he discussed a role that a black man played in the American Revolution, in the Boston Massacre, how he actually catalyzed the incident that happened, which was a huge turning point in the American Revolution, which is something that I just learned, and I've been studying American history since 8th grade. The main goal of King, Davis, and Brown's research was to shine a light on an often ignored topic of history, and that's of African Americans. Their lack of history, exclusion of oppression and abuse, and continued discrimination into the present day all stem from a similar root, which is the historical education of the common American. The education that Americans have on their own history is very important in determining how they will view certain groups of people in the country. And if this history isn't taught a certain way, their views could ultimately end up harming society. And it also emphasizes that the key to teaching successful history is from multiple perspectives, not just one, and to steer away from the perspective of the oppressor. But in order to do that, you must first recognize who the oppressor is and that there is one. These insights will help guide teachers teaching away from history textbooks and toward more primary sources such as photos, art, literature, diaries, and so on. Textbooks are outdated on discussing important topics in United States history. Additionally, by adding more forms of text for students, their comprehension of these will go beyond just reading comprehension. It'll also teach students that although there are two sides to every story, there are often more than just two, specifically in history. So students' ability to understand, looking at a photo and understanding the implications behind it, being able to pick out certain details of it, looking at a painting and seeing how certain details are painted in and what that can imply about the time period or who the painter is. These are all essential in understanding history. Looking at statistics, understanding the implication behind those statistics. These are all super important and can also significantly help students' literacy understand and comprehend when looking at it. So that can significantly help their literacy beyond just being able to read a textbook and understand what it's saying. So thank you for listening. I hope that this gave you a little bit of an insight into what my literature review is on. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.